You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
And welcome in once again to the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. And for those of us joining us on our YouTube channel, as well as killcliff.com and the Killcliff app, we appreciate you guys taking part in the new video venture of the Hazard Ground podcast. Before we get to this week's episode, a story of the shortest man to ever serve in the military. Just a couple of quick notes. I want to remind you guys about our Apple reviews. Please keep them coming. We want to get to over 1,000. Again, this helps grow the podcast and gets more notoriety. So we certainly appreciate everybody who has done so far. Please remind you guys to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground and Hazard Ground Podcast. And don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab as well. You can do the same thing on your smartphone, and it'll redirect you right to the app. So all of your information about your credit card is saved. You spend whatever you want. You shop however you want. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and then we'll donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. We appreciate you guys being part of this Hazard Ground community. The story this week actually is being told by an individual who is not the story that it is about. It is about a man named Richard J Flaherty, who was living on the streets in Miami and befriended a Miami police officer. And eventually, the officer found out who this individual was. Richard Flaherty was the smallest and most unconventional man to serve in the U.S. military. He was a Green Beret who was awarded a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts for his actions in Vietnam. And then his story was told by our guest in a book called The Giant Killer that has also become a movie. He is David Yuzuk joining us on the Hazard Ground podcast. David, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Well, again, it's always interesting to hear the third person point of view. Now, usually when we tell these stories, from somebody else giving the perspective, unfortunately, it's a gold star individual, right? A family member or a spouse that has to tell it. That's not the case for you. I mean, this is a random stranger that you had met on the streets of Miami, and you, as a Miami police officer, is how you came into contact with Richard Flaherty to learn about his story. So before we get to how you met him, just a little bit of background about yourself for our audience.
Well, originally from Brooklyn, New York, moved to Miami and became a police officer. Worked for 20 years and just recently retired with a back injury. Met Richard Flaherty probably just when I transferred, because I transferred from a smaller police department over to the city of Aventura, which is in Miami. Miami broke up into a bunch of little jurisdictions. Everybody wanted their own police department to take care of their personal needs. So I worked for a city of about 120 police officers, full service, detective bureau, SWAT team. And that's when I met Richard.
What were you doing when you met Richard?
Actually, I was working in an off-duty job. You get hired by different people to work roadside construction. I was doing an off-duty job at the movie theater. They were having some problems, some fights there. So I was in uniform, and I would see Richard come into the movies, and he'd spend the whole day there. But he's initially stuck out just because he was so small, 4'9", 97 pounds, but athletic, walked very ramrod straight. He had something about his presence that you knew he was a different type of individual. I would just see him, and we slowly started acknowledging each other, those little head nods. You see somebody over and over, and then head nod went to, how did you like the movie? And we just started talking that way.
So what was one of your first or most memorable interactions with him as you guys started to, befriend each other?
Well, I would start running into him in the city. I would see him just walking around, sitting on benches. Initially, you had the impression something was off when you'd see him all day at that movie theater or all day at the mall, just walking around, sitting on benches. But not until you saw him outdoors sitting on benches that you realized this guy's probably homeless. Just quick thing for your audience. He really kept up his appearance. So, when I say homeless, he did live outdoors, but he was very well kept. So, the thing is, when you first, as a police officer encounter somebody like that, you want to try to get him some help, try to get him off the streets, get him in some type of program. But he was a very proud man. So, I asked him only maybe twice, is there something we can do for you? And he said, no, I'm good. So we have a certain criteria that legally, somebody would have to meet for me to take them against their will and put them in a shelter. And he didn't meet that. He was taking care of himself, well fed, and seemed to be mentally healthy. So my first impressions was this guy knows a lot about the world and world politics, and he was a really intelligent guy. And I enjoyed, we would just, since I didn't ask him about his background and who he was or where he came from, we would just talk about world politics, and I really enjoyed his opinion.
Did you get a sense that he was a veteran, or did he just seem like somebody who was smart, somebody who had been educated, or did you get a sense that he, was a guy who had fought in combat?
No indication of that whatsoever. On top of, like, me and Richard, we started meeting for lunch and coffee, and I've never heard of anyone saying that, in that time when he was in the city, which I knew him for like 15 years, him ever mentioning he was in the military or trying to get some sort of break or something. So no, I had no indication. I just thought he's a really well-read guy and very intelligent and very interesting man to talk to. And, never judge a book by its cover. So that was my impressions.
Did you ever feel or ever try to help him and get him off the street? I mean, you feel like after you develop a friendship with somebody and him, there's a certain sense of, or do you ever, just bluntly approach him and say, hey, Richard, are you homeless? Do you have a place to live? Does that conversation ever happen?
It did. And early on, when I was trying to get him off the streets, but he was just, he just would answer it, I'm okay. And no, I don't need any assistance. And, my ability, I hope I have a good ability to read people, and my ability to read him was just let him be. If I saw him in some sort of really bad condition, I would take some sort of police action to protect him from himself. But he seemed like, even though he was on the streets, he was taking care of himself. And this is free country, and as long as he's not a danger to himself or others, he can choose to live his life the way he wanted to.
Did you ever ask him, as a homeless guy, where are you getting the money to go to the movies? How are you keeping up with your appearance? I mean, some of it just, on the surface doesn't seem to add up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just the old New York, Brooklyn guy thing, where we don't get into, if somebody doesn't volunteer it, we don't really. And I think I really believe that's why, out of all the people, he talked to me probably the most, is because I didn't press him. I kind of read the message he was giving to me, that, he was looking to talk to somebody in friendship, but he certainly didn't like people peering into his life. So I hope I read it right. And we were friends for about 15 years before he dropped that big bomb on me.
Okay, 15 years. And how does that whole conversation come about, where he says to you, I kind of got to tell you who I am?
It's exactly. We were having lunch at a sandwich shop, a Subway sandwich shop. And he just looked at me and said, Dave, it's time I tell you who I really am. So it sounds like something from a movie, but as a police officer, you're super nervous. Here's a guy I enjoyed talking to.
I'm really Andre the Giant. Yeah, I'm just messing with you. Watch this.
Yeah. No, so as a police officer, you're kind of scared. Like, say he's a serial killer. He said he's wanted by the FBI. Like, what are the next words that are going to come out of his mouth, and how is it going to impact my life and his, our friendship? So, he just blurted out, I was the smallest man ever served in the military, and I went to Vietnam and won these medals. And, of course, I just immediately disbelieved him. I just thought it's pretty sad. I thought he was pretty sharp mentally, and this is some sort of delusion. Like, no one ever heard. I've never heard of a 4'9" guy being in the military, and how could he possibly, even make it through basics? So, kind of dismissed it. Kind of felt bad. I humored him. Sometimes we do that. People with delusions and mental. As long as their delusions not harming anybody, you just let it go. So, I didn't really press him too much. We talked, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes the most about it. He told me he did some undercover operations and, just it got very Tom Clancy-like. So went home that night and almost didn't check on Google to see if any part of his story is true, but something told me just take a quick look, and lo and behold, all these old newspaper articles from like 1967 started popping up of smallest man joins the military, smallest man becomes an officer, small man wants a Green Beret type things. And I was in shock. I was in shock because this treasure, this incredible human being that a million people every day pass on a bus bench, might be one of the most interesting people, to ever speak to, if you think back in history. So I was blown away. And when I went to go see him the next day, because he lived under a tree, so there was this one tree that he mostly stayed under, he saw a smile on my face and he said, "Yeah, you didn't believe me, did you? You checked out." He knew, he was really sharp, man. So.
Did anybody else know about your relationship with him? Any family members, other officers, and anybody in the police force? Or is this something you sort of just kept to yourself?
No, the other officers would see me sitting there talking to him, all the time. It's not something I brought up in roll call or something that, but other people knew that me and him had a friendship. I believe there was a few other officers that talked to him, and actually the fire rescue people that were just about a block away from his tree where he lived. I later found out, when I was investigating his life, that they took care of him too. It was pretty remarkable. A bunch of firemen, they let him into the firehouse every once in a while, take a shower. They let him crash on their couch outside to get some sleep. So they were very compassionate, and I'm really glad to hear I wasn't the only one that went out of their way to make Richard a little more comfortable.
All right. So you go through the first step of Google and figure out a little bit more about this. Is the next step let me run them through FBI and Interpol and everything else and every other police system there is to find out what else this guy is about?
Well, the next step, as a former detective, was that undercover operation. He said he worked with the ATF in the 80s, and he was pretty adamant that first time we talked. He said, just, you can ask me questions about my life, but don't look into that case. And I was like, well, why shouldn't I look into that case?
Well, see, he does that. Now you have to go look into it.
Of course. So he said, well, it'd be bad for your career and probably dangerous for my health. And I was like, yeah, okay. Here's another one. Like, okay, yeah, sure.
He's setting you up for this.
Right. Where are we going from here? So I think it took me a week to track down the alleged undercover federal agent that he worked with. And I had contacts, and I tracked the guy down, and he was retired. And I gave him a cold call. I got his phone number through another contact. And I gave him a cold call, and that was on Friday, May 8th, 2015. I called Agent Fred Gleffy. And once again, yep, everything Richard told you is the truth. Yep, we did this undercover operation, and it's all true. And once again, I was blown away, but not any more blown away than I find out the next morning after the phone call that guys I work with, the other police officers, early in the morning, I don't know, 5 or 6 a.m., they were knocking on my door saying, "Hey, sorry to tell you, your friend was just killed in a hit and run." So, 6 hours after I made that call, Richard was dead.
Wow. Okay. Well, let me back up. Are you allowed to tell us what the undercover ATF operation is? Is it all unclassified, declassified at this point?
Yeah, there was something, I actually, the sequences, I did make the documentary first, and after the documentary, so many people reached out with new information, and there was information that I knew, but I couldn't confirm, that I didn't put in the documentary because I wanted that thing to be as exact as possible and even reaching. So the undercover case initially was a couple of Green Berets out of Fort Bragg were stealing tons of weapons and explosives and selling it on the black market. And Richard got wind of it, and he brought in the ATF, and they worked undercover. The ATF agent, Fred Gleffy, he posed as a Miami drug dealer looking to purchase explosives and weapons for the Colombian cartels. So but that's not what Richard told me what the real mission was. He said that was sort of like part of the mission. The real mission, which I just released in the book, was that they had to recover a SATM, which was a atomic demolition munition, which was a miniature nuclear device, a miniature nuclear bomb called a SATM, and that was declassified, I think, maybe 10 years ago. The Army created it in, I think, the late 50s with the idea that a special forces two-man team would infiltrate into an area and plant this thing, and it had about the power to take out the Hoover Dam or a block of New York City on top of the radiation.
Wow.
So one of those SATMs went missing from Vietnam. Most of my sources all said that it was inert, that it was used for training, but it still had about $1 million price tag on the black market, even back in the 80s. If it got, into the wrong hands, somebody can kind of figure out how to recreate it. Only one person told me that it was a live SATM. So I didn't put that in the documentary because I just didn't have enough corroboration. So that's probably about the biggest classified thing from that case. The other thing that was a little shocking was after the case, the undercover case, was a bunch of newspaper reporters, which those stories just got declassified a couple of years ago, wrote a lot about that the whole mission was a CIA operation by Richard Flaherty to help get weapons down to Central America and to Honduras and fight communism there in the 80s, sort of like the Iran-Contra scandal. So a lot of layers to the story. I solved some, and every time I solved one mystery, two more would pop up. And I think that's the whole essence of Richard Flaherty. They say it's a puzzle wrapped in a riddle and an enigma. Yeah, that's the essence of Richard Flaherty. And he was very compartmentalized, that he never told this, everyone the whole story. He would only tell, even his closest friends, family members, little pieces of his life. So no one really ever can figure out everything. He's just, besides being the smallest guy to serve in the military, just really mysterious guy.
As you start going down these rabbit holes, is there a part of you as the cop that takes over that says, I have to find the end of this thing? I mean, are you almost caught up in what you're looking at?
The rabbit holes don't stop. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of thought once I finished the documentary, I did, because I did ask Richard if I could do a story on his life after I didn't know how I was going to do a story. I just thought at the time before he was killed, this is the most incredible story of the most incredible underdog that did the impossible, became a Green Beret. How did you become homeless? And how do we prevent other soldiers returning from becoming homeless or PTSD? So that was the initial idea of exploring it before he gets killed. And I just and one thing he made me promise was that if we start the project, no matter what happens, you have to finish it. So I felt this tremendous burden to not leave this man's life on the side of the road the way he was left in the hit and run, to die on the side of the road. So I just felt a tremendous burden to complete the story and do the documentary. But then it never ended. Like, I thought I was done and move on with the next chapter of my life. And then all these people are contacting me that, I went to South Africa with Richard. We worked, as mercenaries. We fought in the Rhodesian. I'm like, oh my God, it's never going to end. He's, this is a never ending story. So I met this journey, you think about, like, I've heard some people say, oh my God, Richard was lucky that he had you as a friend. I can't even, I think it's completely the opposite. I think I am beyond lucky that this man talked to me, that I had the time I did have with him, and the journey it brought me on. Because, looking into his life, I had to go to reunions and meet up with other guys from the 101st Airborne that he served with in Vietnam. And I made some long-lasting friendships with these guys. I mean, they took me under their wing, and I'm not a military guy. I was a cop, but that doesn't, I don't speak the same language, but amazing journey.
I got so many questions. So for a cop and a detective, I mean, are you, when you start undertaking this project, you're not still on the force, are you?
Yeah, when it initially started, I was still working.
How do you juggle all that?
Well, it was tough, but I got permission from my chief, and my chief was actually a Vietnam vet. And once he said, "Hey, did you vet him really good? Is this guy really?" Everybody was blown away. Is this guy really what he says? And once I proved that, he said, "Yeah, go ahead." I mean, police work, I think we're seeing now is not just about taking bad guys to jail and all. It's also about reaching out, meeting the community, being compassionate. So I think it was important. And yeah, I burned the candle at both ends. I worked, an 8-10 hour shift, and then I would start writing and getting prepared. Initially the idea was, like I said, I didn't know how I was going to tell the story, but I didn't want to do it. I was hoping some real filmmaker or somebody with real book writing experience, they were going to take it over. It wasn't, how am I going to do it? I'm just
that was my next question. You've never wrote a book before, obviously. Do you even know how to start this whole process? I mean, do you even know how to start putting chapter 1 together?
No, I mean, I'll tell you what, though, the years of working as a detective, actually, as a police officer too, actually really helped, because what are you doing in a narrative? Your offense incident narrative or your detective report, you're telling the story, and some of my detective reports were 20, 50 pages, and you're just walking people through the story. So I think I had the experience from the police work to do the writing. As far as the documentary, I just winged it.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. If you're going to write the story of someone's life who unfortunately is no longer living, how do you fill in all the holes? Like, I mean, and again, it's one of those things where, yes, there's the internet out there, but still at the end of the day, there's some first person stuff. I mean, was a lot of it you relying on your memory about stories that you guys had talked about and things that you had discussed over the years? Or, I mean, how do you even go about giving people context for who Richard Flaherty was?
Yeah, well, after he told me who he was, and then I asked him, "Hey, can I do a story about your life?" That's when we went into those really long, in-depth conversations, and we were meeting every day, and I was taking notes, and I was questioning him, and "Hey, walk me through the story, and where did you go from here, and what were your thoughts, and tell me about the jungle. What did it smell like? What did it feel like when you were there? Were you scared in Vietnam of getting shot, or?" So I guess the investigator mind helps really ask a lot of those questions. Now, Richard also assisted me by having all his stuff that he kept his whole life in a storage locker. So it's sort of like, well, the breadcrumbs to his life were right there after he passed. There were so many letters and notes, and it just gave me such an incredible insight into his life and his personal thoughts. There were letters, poems, there were narratives that he had to write for the VA hospital, and they're asking him, why does he think he has PTSD? Because he was trying to get help for his PTSD. And you just hear him telling stories about things that happened to him in Vietnam, and losing friends, and going up and dropping grenades and spider holes. And when you pull it out, it's 2 VC women, and one of them's got a picture of her kid there. So what does that do to a person? And that's, I think that's an important lesson of the story is, we do send our husbands or wives, their brothers or sisters or sons and daughters off to war. What are we going to do when they come back? Because they're going to experience some pretty horrifying things, and they're going to have to return back to civilian life at some point. And what are we doing to make sure they make that transition?
I guess I didn't ask this directly, but I mean, the guy's got a storage locker, for crying out loud. He's going to the movies. He's living a normal life. Why is he living under a tree? How does he end up homeless? And why doesn't somebody who has to be as resourceful as a Green Beret to survive in Vietnam, why and how does he not get himself a roof or in a place to live? It just doesn't add up.
He's had roofs over his head. Matter of fact, his brother, who was an attorney, once even bought him an apartment, but he couldn't stay indoors. He just there's a story I just got. I mean, these stories just keep coming in, but there's a story of Richard right after Vietnam As soon as he got out of Vietnam, he flew to Miami Beach, and a bunch of guys from where he grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, were there partying. So Richard was maybe 24 or 23. And the guy who told me the story said some tiny little guy who shows up who looks like a freshman in high school at the hotel. And I don't know anything about him, but the guy's got a limousine. We go out to Miami Beach and we're drinking and we're partying. And that was the night that Richard jumped on stage with B.B. King. B.B. King was doing a concert and Richard jumped on stage and was dancing next to B.B. Richard was a partier too, and he liked to have fun. But the interesting part of the story is they all jump at the end of the night, jump back in the limo, and Richard has them drop him off in a park because he couldn't sleep in the hotel. He just didn't feel safe. So he slept that night in the park instead of, I guess the jungle kind of really did something to him. Yeah, fuck with him. Yeah.
So, okay, so he's homeless, but he's not homeless, right? Like, I mean, is that important to the story at all? Is that important to know? Does that encapsulate him a little bit? Does it help you understand it a little bit better?
You also have you have the thing, well, is he homeless by choice or is he homeless? He thinks it's by choice, but it's just his mind just didn't get the help it needed, because that's not normal to live outdoors like that. It's not an easy life to live out on the streets. Richard even got jumped and beat up once or twice. It's a very difficult life. So it's really that's one of the hardest questions, I get asked is, why was he homeless? Partially was his choice, and partially was, I don't think it was his choice. He just couldn't help it. The damage was too deep. As an officer, you don't really think about the pressure, because Richard was initially, he was a lieutenant, was in charge of a recon unit. Then as a Green Beret, he was a captain, but you don't really think about the pressure on an officer when you don't come home with all the guys that were under you. Like, what, you lost guys. Richard, one of his first battles was during the Tet Offensive, when I think they had, some of the worst losses on the American side. So that was his first battle. He just got to Vietnam and he was thrown into the middle of the Tet Offensive. So, those guys, there's a story of a supermarket night manager. The supermarket was near Richard's tree that used to come out of work at sometimes 2 a.m. And Richard was just in his sleep would just be screaming and fighting. And, those are demons. Those are some pretty powerful demons. And, early intervention for guys like that are probably, the only way to save them from the streets, because once it gets to that point, Richard, you're not getting him off the street.
Let's talk a little bit more about Richard's life. Obviously, growing up, he's the shortest kid everywhere. Was he teased a lot? Did he tell you about his childhood? What was that like for him, always being the shortest kid?
Yeah, he told me a little bit about it. His mom had a rare blood problem that I forgot how it went. I spoke to her doctor about it. She was Rh positive. So what happens when you're the second born child? It could attack your hormone system. So they knew early on. Before Richard took his first breath, they knew that either he wasn't going to make it or he was going to grow up to be a dwarf. And people want to know, was he technically a dwarf? And medically, yeah, he was. So yeah, he told me it was really everywhere he went, people would stare at him. Everywhere he went, people would laugh at him, and he had a lot to prove. I don't think he was a Napoleon guy where he had, he's had a chip on his shoulder, but he would fight. I spoke to his friends that he grew up with, and one thing about Richard is he wouldn't take much. He'd let you have 1 or 2 insults, and then that was it. He's throwing punches. So pretty resilient little guy. He started training before people did back then in martial arts. He started training in martial arts, really toughening himself up. And I think in high school, he got a little bit more comfortable with it. In high school, they called, I didn't come up with the name, the Giant Killer. That's actually his high school nickname. And
oh, really?
Because there was a school bully that would pick on everybody, but certainly he liked Richard as a target. I think Richard took him out really bad one day, and then from then on, they called him the Giant Killer.
Oh, wow. Okay. How does he come across the Army? Was he drafted or did he enlist on his own?
So Richard came from a whole family of war heroes. Matter of fact, his cousin is a Homer Weiss is a Medal of Honor winner. His whole family, his uncle served in World War II. So he came from I mean, it must have been always in his mind that he wanted to serve his country. He wanted to do his part. But no military would allow him entry. Most, like the Army, you have to be 5 feet tall, 100 pounds. So it took him 3 years of letter writing.
I've been in the Army 20 years. I never heard of that.
Yeah, that was a height and size requirement. So he needed to get a waiver.
I thought we took everybody.
I don't know today.
Judging by some of the people I've served with, I feel like we have.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's possible. Yeah. So, he had to get a waiver from, I think he was writing congressman, and he got a 3-star general to finally say, give the guy a shot. If you can make it in basic, you can make it. If not, kick him out. I mean, it's that simple. So no, I don't think people really believe that he was going to be able to run with a backpack on that weighed as much as him, or get over the walls and do any of the obstacle courses or any of that stuff. I don't think anyone, even thought about it, but he made it.
Was there anything physically he struggled with that he told you about? I mean, even if it was something like you said, climbing over a wall where height just generally comes into play, or was he able just to adapt and overcome?
So I spoke to guys who were in basic training with him. I spoke to guys who went through officer candidate school, and they said if most guys ran 3 miles, Richard would run 5 miles. If the guys would do 30 push-ups, Richard would do 100. So he would not only just get by, he would outcompete everybody. So he was probably super, super athletic, like a gymnast type athletics, just incredible athlete.
So when does the Green Beret situation come in? When does special operations come in for him? I mean, is that something he decided to do, or was that more of, hey, I'm going to prove myself to everybody type deal?
So his first tour is with the 101st Airborne. And after he returns back to the United States after that, I think, he said that he wanted to test himself, and he wanted to, test himself with the best. So he joined and went through Special Forces school. And I think he went through the training, Special Forces training, then went back to, he was with the 3rd Special Forces Group 46 Company, which is based out of Thailand, there's these guys that it's called Mac v. SOG. And they're coming out now finally telling the stories that, we were in Laos and we were in Cambodia and we were all these things. And they're some of the most incredible, amazing heroes and stories. But the guys from the 46 Special Forces Group, and I only spoke to 2 or 3 of them, one guy who served right after Richard, they're very hush-hush about what they're doing. They would recite out of a book every time I would ask them, like, okay, what were you guys doing there? And they're like, we were there to train the Thai Border Patrol. And that they wouldn't say anything else. I've had other guys, Special Forces guys say, no, those guys were also crossing the border, but they signed the contract, not only with the Army, not to ever talk about it, but also with Thailand, which I guess Thailand treated them really good. And to this day, it's very hard to get any of those guys from the 46 to really give you anything more than, we train Thai Border Patrol, which seems kind of ridiculous for, why would you send the best trained Green Berets over there to do something anybody could train?
Yeah, we've actually interviewed a Mac v. SOG guy here on the Hazard Ground. So I'm a little familiar with that story and what they've done. Really interesting stuff. But as he completes, Special Forces training, does he get any notoriety within the military for what he's done, or is he somebody who shied away from it? I mean, obviously he stands out. And like you said, so many people remember everything about him because you'll never forget the 4'9" guy. Like anything you do, there was a guy who was so short. Like you'll always remember that more than I think you will, a noticeable scar or somebody's ethnic background or whatever. That just always sticks out with you. So what was that? Was he starting to get recognition in the military for who he was?
A strange thing the military does, and if you look on Google, it seems like it's been going on since the 1900s. For some reason, they always pose the tallest guy with the shortest guy. So there's one famous picture of Richard, and it was in all the magazines. So he did get a little bit of notoriety, but he wasn't really big into the notoriety. To this day, obviously, some people still remember that tiny little guy. But I mean, the big disappointment was he comes back after his year in Thailand, and they have the reduction in force, the RIF, which they're downsizing the military, and the first guys to not get their contracts renewed are the officers. So Richard's real dream after his tour in Thailand was to go into training. He wanted to teach, the new guys what he learned, and that unfortunately didn't happen with the RIF. And Richard wasn't the only guy, and you do hear a lot of stories about those are the guys who went over to Rhodesia and other countries to give their services. They kind of felt a little bit let down by the country. Richard was a patriot till the end, till that day in May 9th, 2015. He hated communism with a passion, and he, from what he told me and from other people told me, if there was communism spreading somewhere, he wanted to be there to stop it. I mean, right at the end, I forgot what years it was, he was trying to get over to Iraq to rejoin the army, and he was, I guess, in his late 50s at the time. He did make it to Iraq. I found that on his passport, but it wasn't with the army. What was he doing there? Nobody knows. So we're assuming he was a private military contractor, maybe just doing training, but nobody really has explained, why he was in Iraq in maybe it was 2003 or 2005.
Yeah, there's no communism in Iraq, that I can tell you. He might have been geographically misguided. I kid. But this is also a guy that has 2 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star. So let's start with the Purple Hearts. How is he wounded? What happened? Do you know?
Actually, I think he was wounded 4 times, but he told me he only got 2 because I looked at his medical records, and I know he had some shrapnel in his leg. He had shrapnel in his back. I know his eardrums were punctured from some explosions. The one thing that other guys that served with him said that, when there was a concussion or an explosion, maybe you get knocked back a few feet, but Richard would fly 10 feet away. It would just really, he didn't have the body mass. He took it pretty tough, those explosions and RPGs. But from what I remember, it's mostly from shrapnel. I think he had a grenade shrapnel in his right leg, and he had some shrapnel in his back. I know he had a bad jumping injury when he was in training. There's another guy who wrote a book about Richard, wrote a book about his time as a Green Beret, and he mentioned going to Special Forces school with Flaherty, and that during one jump, Flaherty really hurt his back bad. But so he had some injuries.
When it comes to his Silver Star, do you know have you seen the citation? Do you know what it's all about?
Yeah, I actually have this citation. They encountered a fortified enemy bunker, and it was really chewing up his platoon, and Richard rushed the bunker and took a lot of the enemy fire off of them, and he ordered something I never heard of, a 90 millimeter recoilless rifle. So he ordered that up while he was taking distracting them with the fire, and they were able to take out the bunker and complete their mission. But supposedly he put himself in harm's way numerous times in that little fight.
Does he indicate how combat may have been easier for him because of his tiny stature? I mean, was he able to hide easier? Was he able to avoid things easier?
Well, he it's funny because remember I said, I asked him, were you afraid in Vietnam? And he said, I'm not trying to be brag, but honestly, I wasn't. I'm not trying to be he said, I just felt like my size would be an advantage. I felt like maybe they would even think I'm a VC. There was a time when a couple of the guys got lost behind enemy lines that he did actually put on a VC uniform and went out there to look for them. And whether they really believed he was a Viet Cong or something, I don't know. I'm sorry, NVA or
right.
But he did some crazy stuff.
Was there any story that you heard about him that you found or you just didn't believe that you couldn't verify?
I'm pretty sure there's a couple of them that I didn't put in the documentary or the book. I can't, they don't come to me now, but no, I vetted, there were some people that made some really outlandish. Richard would never, well, I mean, okay, so what, another piece of Richard is that I mean, I believe it's mental illness, was that he felt the Homeland Security was after him, or Department of Defense was after him all the time and chasing him on the streets. And usually you'll hear that with guys saying the CIA is after me, but with Richard, I believe he was saying, I'm trying to think of, I think it was Department of Homeland Security, he would say we're monitoring him. And that was just too far for me. I wasn't, it's like, Richard, why would, why are they going to bother you 50 years later? There was even one day, there was one strange day. I do a lot of, I've done a couple of these interviews. I've never talked about this, but there was one strange day that in the last week of his life that we were meeting, and I was taking all my notes and asking him those millions of questions. So after the meeting, and, it seemed like, we were at Boston Market eating chicken. So as we walked out, Richard turned to me and said, don't think I don't know who you really are. Talking about, Richard? He goes, I know you're one of them. You're not a cop. You're a federal agent, and this is a whole. You're just doing surveillance on me, and I really felt horrible at that point in time. When he said that to me, I felt really terrible, and I said, well, maybe, maybe he's compromised mentally too much for me to be asking him for his life story. Maybe this is wrong of me to be questioning him and maybe putting him through this. And I was beyond super uncomfortable that, I'm friends with him for 15 years. And here he is accusing me of somebody that he's saying are, causing him harm. So I really, really was shaken up when he said that to me. And I didn't know what we were supposed to meet the next day for coffee at a gas station was the plan. And I didn't know if he was going to show up, because that's how we left it. He walked away from me and he said, I know who you really are. I know what this is. And I'm like, oh shit. So we met, I showed up at the gas station, and lo and behold, he walked in and acted like everything was fine. My only guess is I spoke to a guy who was friends with him throughout the 70s and 80s. And he would say Richard would constantly test people and test their loyalty and question them. And really, he would do that every once in a while. And I'm assuming he just threw it out there to see my reaction.
What is the most troubling is not the right word, because I don't want, you've indicated some of the mental stuff that has gone on, but when you think about Richard's entire story, is there something that sort of sticks with you that just doesn't feel right about it? Is there something that doesn't add up for you, or does it all just kind of have a little bit of, this is the arc of the guy's life and this is how it went sort of deal, just sort of fits, if that makes sense?
There's always a little bit of danger for me looking too deep into his life, because when I made the documentary, I wanted to make sure that I didn't put him too much on a pedestal. I left some pretty rough things on there. There was some guys saying that Richard was pretty tough on the enemy in Vietnam. He really wasn't taking too many prisoners when the opportunity. So that was kind of there were some dark things in there. And then there's always, when I'm following up his trail, later in life, and he's traveling all over the world and doing things that nobody knows. Well, what exactly is he doing? So, I try to accept him for who he is. And, I hope, I won't not turn over a rock for the fear that I might just learn something bad. I mean, it is what it is. You got to take on a man's life. I don't think it's fair to tell his story unless you tell it honestly.
After you wrote the book and did the documentary, was there anybody from his family that reached out? Was there anybody who was super close to him that reached out, either just to say thank you or had some sort of contrary notion of what you had learned? Was anybody angry about what you had wrote?
Great question. So Richard was only close. He's pretty sad, and I hate to bring this up. He had a falling out with his brother his older brother, Walter, and they didn't speak for 10 years before his death. Matter of fact, Walter was one of the first guys that I interviewed. And I know it would have been against Richard's, but, he said some tough things about his brother, but, but how do you know what's real and what's not? So I was very, very glad that I spoke to his brother, and I didn't get any animosity, and his brother seemed to really care. But his brother was having some health problems too at the time that I interviewed him. But Richard was close to his two cousins. He had Donna Marlin and Jeannie Rinaldi, or his two cousins, that he would keep in touch with. That was really about the only people in his life that he would keep in touch with. And I went up to Stanford, and they really were great, and they were really warm, and they were really open. I haven't encountered anybody yet from the family or friends that, is upset at me. I thought I was going to get, just recently contacted, those two Green Berets that were doing that were caught in that undercover operation stealing explosives. One passed away, and the other one I spoke to. Oh, actually, here's one. I spoke to one of those Green Berets that went to jail. That he was supposed to go to jail for 40 years on that case, ended up doing like 10. And it was the most uncomfortable conversation. Here I am cold calling this guy, and his first words were, Richard Flaherty ruined my life. He set me up. This thing was a CIA operation. We were supposed to be getting weapons down to Central America, and Richard, set me up. He ruined my life. That was a really, really tough, uncomfortable phone call. Yeah, that's one guy who hated Richard. But then I got contacted. The other Green Beret that passed, his daughter contacted me, and I was like, oh my God, this is not going to be good, because, in the documentary, I put the facts out there of what they got arrested for, and all the facts of the case. And no, she wasn't upset at all. She was, it was what it was. And she wanted to know if I had any other information about her father. The rule for me as a cop is once a guy does his time, he starts new. So those two Green Berets in my book, once they did their time, they were good. I didn't have any issue with them. Once a man or a woman does her time, why release them back into society if you're never going to give them a chance again?
When you had talked to the Green Beret, said it was a CIA operation, was there any truth to what he was saying, or he was at this point just sort of delusional about what he was really doing?
That's super, super tough. I mean, because Agent Gleffy and then the federal prosecutors that I interviewed, man, they were just saying it's so rock solid, that it couldn't be anything else. But you look at those.
Taught you that it's usually not the case.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I had and I still have a great personal relationship with Agent Gleffy, and he's one of the hardest working, honest people I've ever met, and most incredible investigators. When I interviewed him for the documentary, this guy showed up, 40 years later, with every file, every note pristine from that case. I mean, that's a real pro. I mean, I was never that much of a pro, but this guy showed up and he had, stacks and stacks of files from that case, and his memory was really sharp. Is there a chance that there were other layers to that case? Yeah, of course there are. There's many different layers to some of these crazy stories. I don't know. I usually give the BS answer that, the truth somewhere lies in the middle, but I don't know. I would say, it's much greater chance that they did the crimes that they were arrested for, and maybe a very small chance that it was a CIA operation. Small.
We've all watched enough investigation, discovery, and murder crime shows to know when a cop is interviewing somebody that they kind of already know the answers to the questions that they're asking, right?
Yeah.
And so I say that tongue in cheek, but the investigative antenna that you have during this process, I know you talked a little bit about some of the stories, but was there anything that Richard told you, or any story that you came upon where your sort of investigative antenna pops up and you're like, you just had to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper? Was there something that a story that sort of just really had you working overtime more than usual?
I tried to. I think everything. I got really bogged down with that ATF case. Especially when Richard started telling me about the SATM. That really, it took me a while to really unwind things, and I couldn't get corroboration from any other federal agents that worked on that case. It finally somebody did, and I don't want to. I gave them my confidence. I wouldn't, but enough where I felt comfortable about it to write it on the book. But that one. That undercover operation really bogged me down, and I guess especially going after that nuclear device, because Richard said it kind of. I never heard of a SATM. I never heard of a miniature nuclear weapon. And do I need to know that there's possibly people running around with miniature nuclear weapons to detonate them? We think about terrorism, like these things are floating around too. I got to worry about this shit too. So that's probably what took the most time, and it was a tough case to investigate.
As far as the military is concerned, I know you said he had a lot of his records. Did you have to petition them for anything? And the bureaucracy there has got to be millions of miles long, as I well know. But I mean, were they tough to deal with if you had to work with them?
No, I mean, he really did have almost everything. I mean, I all his military records he kept. Obviously, I did contact the CIA and Homeland Security and Department of Defense, and I got the standard. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of Richard Flaherty. So those were all dead ends. There wasn't anything to go on there. But the military,
but apparently Google can. So thanks for my tax dollars going to good use. We appreciate it. But so you make the book, and you decided to do the documentary. I know you said before with the documentary, you just sort of winged it. What do you mean winged it, and how and why? And why do the video version of this thing?
I thought it would, I thought it would be easier than the book. We had a lot of news footage, when he got killed, and I just thought that was the starting point of it. And plus, I did want to keep video records of this investigation of his life. So, even if I just was going to write the book, I still would have recorded these journeys and these interviews that I did. So it ended up working out right. I think it came out all right for the documentary. But I think that was my thought process, just to try to get things on audio or get them on video for just safekeeping.
What was the hardest part about putting the documentary together? You said you thought it was going to be easier. What was the hardest part?
There was so many times I was going to quit. I mean, there was just so many times. I mean, it just, there was so many of the technical aspects. Like, okay, great. You shoot a movie on video, but then what happens? And then how do you edit it? And then how do you get it distributed? And then, how do you, there's so many terms. You're so behind on the learning curve of the filmmaker that maybe went to school for this, or they were, training in other aspects of it. But there were so many frustrating aspects of getting the project over the finish line. It just, there was just days I was like, it felt like I was climbing a mountain. And then I was like, oh, I'm at the top. And then, no, you got 20 more feet to go. And you go 20 more feet. Like, no, go 50 more feet. And you're like, can't do it. But, like quitting wasn't really, something I could do. I couldn't do that for Richard. So I don't know how it got done. I just kept pushing and pushing. And then just one day I just somehow was past the finish line, and I was like, oh shit, it's done. But it's a very difficult road. I mean, it is 2 years. I don't know. We filmed for maybe 6 months, and it was maybe 2 years of editing. And remember, so I have 40 hours worth of video footage. But how do you put it all together? Who's going to tell me how do you start the story? What's the middle of it? What's the ending? I mean, I'm looking at the 40 hours of footage. I remember that's, you want to talk about the day I was going to quit. I was like, okay, now what do I do? Because nobody's like, for free going to help me. Like say, oh yeah, I got nothing better to do. Let me come by your house and we'll go over this 40 hours of video. It wasn't something. I was trying to get other filmmakers involved, and they were like, I got no interest in this. So, you learn as you go. You fake it till you make it, and that's kind of how it went.
What are the details of the hit and run that killed Richard?
Well, the that night, Richard was crossing the street. I forget off the top of my head. I forgot. Maybe it was 12:30 at night, 12:30 a.m. The morning of May 9th. He was crossing the street, 50 yards away from his tree. He got struck by a car that launched him into the air. He hit his head on the front windshield. He cracked the little side window of a Prius. His head smashed the window. He flew. He had his backpack on. His backpack flew. His shoes flew off. He landed in the median. His body landed in the median, and the car fled. A bunch of joggers found him in the morning. The first thing they saw was a bloody sneaker in the street, and then they walked up to the median and they just saw his body. Most of his body was uncovered. I think he was partially covered in some of the weeds. They went sadly to the fire rescue house that used to take care of Richard, saying, "Hey, there's a guy on the ground over there," and those guys recognized him immediately when they went over there, and then they knew he was gone, and they called my police department. So we had no leads on the suspect. We were pulling video and we were taking pieces of the vehicle, and most shocking thing is we were looking for skid marks. And usually, in a hit and run like that, you're going to see, even if the person is DUI, when you strike somebody, you either slam on the brakes or you swerve your wheel. But the strange part of this was there was no skid marks. So, I wasn't a vehicular homicide detective, but our guys were pretty experienced to know it's very rare not to see any skid marks, unless it was done on purpose. Extraordinary accusations need extraordinary proof. I never found any extraordinary proof that the person who ended up being a woman working for another police department, she worked for a homicide unit as a stenographer, struck him that night, drove home, checked the front of her car when she got home, because we got that on video, parking surveillance video, walked back to the crime scene, with her intention to find out what struck her car, because she claimed she didn't know what hit her car, despite Richard's head bashing off her windshield. She claimed she didn't see anybody in the median, although other witnesses said that he was clearly, you could have seen him, and the woman knew where she was in the accident. She went home. She called her insurance at like 2 a.m., tried to get insurance to come out there first thing in the morning and fix the car. She walked back to the crime scene in the morning, saw the body being covered with a tarp, and bystanders and cops and news media out there, and she didn't mention anything to anybody. She waited till later that day. She was going into work on a Saturday, and when she got to work, she spoke to one of her bosses and said, "Hey, would you check my car? I might have been in an accident." And the guy walked out and he saw blood and hair on the car, and he said, yeah, you struck someone, and he contacted my police department, and that's how it went.
What did they end up charging her with?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing. She didn't get a ticket. She didn't get in trouble. The state attorney's office, Florida State Attorney's Office, refused to press charges despite my department wanting to arrest her for even some of the minimal of leaving the scene of accident with great injury. And the state attorney's office felt that her testimony that she didn't know what she hit allowed her to walk. So nothing happened to her. She made recent news about 6 months ago, maybe less, maybe 5 months ago, worldwide news. She was involved in a DUI accident in Boca Raton and went on a viral rant, anti-Semitic viral rant. The thing is this is, I mean, she's not, it's not going to bring back Richard. I don't live my life to torment her. I don't do anything. Her life is sad enough as is as a human being. I don't think she even realizes, what it means to kill somebody. I don't know. I don't know anything about the woman. I don't want to know anything about the woman. I can see from that viral video that she's still mentally deranged, and I don't have anything to say about her except for, I celebrate Richard's life, and I try not to think about too much of his death.
Wow. Okay. Well, in that case, we won't spend any more time there. Obviously, not what you're here to discuss. So, what do you think Richard would say if he saw the documentary and read the book?
He would be pissed off because one of the promises, besides the if we start the project, we got to finish it, is if it's made into a movie, his quote was $1 million, which I don't have, but that's what he wanted for his. And then he also made me promise
for a tree.
Yeah, and then he also made me promise if it's a feature film that Brad Pitt has to play him in the movie.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Work.
Yeah, I don't know if Brad's going to be doing that. So what would Richard? I hope he would be proud. I hope he would. He wanted to tell his life story. He wanted me to get it out there to the world. I think he felt now is the time to tell it. So I mean, I hope I didn't let him down. I hope and not just him and all those guys who, from the 101st Airborne and all the Green Berets and all those other amazing people I met on the journey and his friends and people grew up. I hope I didn't let those people down. I did the best I could. That's it.
Did you ever ask him? I mean, look, you made this book when? Richard died in 2015, you said, correct?
So I made the book after the documentary because my plan was never to. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to tell it, but it was only because after the documentary, I got contacted by so many people with new stories. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta fill this in. I got to fill in because there was so many missing pieces in the documentary that I felt that I needed to answer those questions.
But like the date that you made the documentary was what year?
I released it initially in 2018.
Right. So you started what, 2015? I think you said
2015. Yeah. I mean, it was a couple months after he passed.
Sure.
I sat on my ass for a while saying, I'm not going to do a story on his life now. He's dead. It's over. I give up. But, that little voice, and then the stuff in Richard's storage locker just made me keep going forward and just one step at a time.
The reason I ask is because, 2015 at this point in time, we have Lone Survivor, we have American Sniper, we have Black Hawk Down, we have Saving Private Ryan. We have all these other stories that are out there about military people and everything that has gone on. And yet Richard never tells his story to anybody but you, and you had known him for 15 years. Did you ever ask him, Richard, why me? Why are you telling me after all these years when, I mean, clearly he was smart enough to know that he could have used a variety of different outlets to get his story out there if he wanted it?
I don't really know, except for the fact that Richard didn't trust many people. He had very, very deep, mistrust of everyone, paranoia. So maybe I was just, I was the only guy who talked to him on a regular basis. Maybe it's just that deep feeling of trust. I don't know. I certainly don't think Richard's goal in life was to tell his life story. I think it just kind of happened at the end that I think, he also had stage 4 cancer on the top of his head that he attributed to Agent Orange. I think he knew his time was running out one way or the other. And I think he wanted to get the story off his shoulders right at the end. I don't believe in the afterlife or sixth sense or, anything that you can't prove. It's kind of hard to, but I mean, it's kind of hard to say that that he confessed his life story to me, 10 days before he was killed. It's pretty strange timing. There's one photo that I put in the documentary that was pretty strange. It was from like 2 nights before he was killed. I never really took any pictures with Richard or of Richard. I only took one video of him of one night. We were just on a bench and I just said, hey, Richard, let me just get this on my phone. Because when I initially approached him about doing some sort of story on him, I thought I had all the time in the world. But one day I did pull out my phone and do a little video. that's there in the documentary. But I took this picture of him sleeping under his tree 2 days before he was killed. And when you look at the picture, it's so bizarre that there was a light coming off a street lamp, and it points exactly to where he would be killed 2 nights later as he's sleeping. And it's just one of those bizarre things.
What do you miss the most about this friendship?
We'd laugh, we'd laugh, and I remember just like whenever world politics was going on, because he would read the newspaper I would just always ask him, what do you think is going to happen here? What do you think? So it was just, it was kind of bizarre, but it was sort of like a mentor relationship, because once we started talking, Richard was teaching me. He was teaching me about the world. He would talk to me about philosophy. He would ask me that crazy what's the sound, the one hand clapping bullshit, and always make me answer some sort of, questions about life and philosophy. And there's another great Richard story that one day we were sitting having lunch, and he was like, "My boy, I'm going to tell you the answer to all life's mysteries." And I was like, "Okay, Richard, what's the answer?" So he goes, "The key to life is money in the bank calms nerves." And he made me repeat that like 5 times. Just money in the bank calms nerves. Money in the bank. I was like, I appreciate that, Richard. That was his philosophy.
Was he a guy who had money in the bank?
I had his bank accounts, and there were some times where he did have some money, maybe $3,000, maybe $5,000, and there was times when there was like $50 in his bank account. So, he had a little pension from the Army. I think he was getting like $500 a month, which covered food and whatever medications he needed. But no, there really wasn't much money unless there's some crazy offshore account that I never found, because there's so many. We could be here for 10 days and I could tell you bizarre Richard stories. That last week of his life, maybe 3 days before he was killed, I was working my shift, and he asked me to come meet him at this condominium. This pretty nice condominium. I was like, "Oh, why do I got to meet you? Just come here and meet me." So I went up there, and there he is in this really nice apartment. Not super. It was like $150,000 apartment. And he's like, "Well, what do you think?" I was like, "What are we doing here, Richard?" He goes, "Well, I'm going to buy it." I was like, "What are you talking about? You're going to buy it?" He goes, "Well, I've come into some money and I'm going to buy it." And it's just such a bizarre thing. A couple of days before he was killed, and I asked him, I said, "Well, what do you?" And he told me, "Well, I got this old friend that's in real estate and he owes me money." And I interviewed the guy after, and the guy didn't know I was going to ask him that question. And the guy said, "Absolutely not. I wasn't going to buy Richard. I have apartments. I rent them. I would give Richard an apartment. I've offered him cheap apartments to rent. He was my friend, but no, I wasn't buying him an apartment." So what was that about? Fuck if I know.
Any other lingering questions like that you weren't able to answer?
There's a million. There
are more loose ends you haven't been able to tie up, or
there's a million loose. There's people in Thailand he was sending money to. There's all these trips. He went to Venezuela twice, to Puerto La Cruz in the 2000s when he had no money, and it's a super dangerous place. What was he doing? There's a million. Richard, he was in Cambodia and Thailand also when he was homeless. He was everywhere. He would go to North Dakota in the middle of the winter, and he hated the cold, and he would go like every 3 years. He'd go on that same week that he would stay in this one hotel in North Dakota.
Fly or drive?
Fly. He would fly. And what was he doing there? I called North Dakota, and I called reporters, and I called cops, and I was like, what in that week's time was so important that he would be there? And I thought maybe there was a gun show or something, or some sort of military parade, but it was the middle of winter in North Dakota, and nobody knows.
That's crazy. See, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you got my mind racing a little bit. Either there really is just some sort of mental disposition that isn't 100% where it needs to be, or it just, that doesn't drive you nuts as a cop, not being able to get those answers.
It makes me crazy. It makes me so effing crazy that because I just want to know. Like I said, I'm a little bit afraid, but I still do want to know what was he doing on those trips? What was he doing in Venezuela? In a really dangerous area. I don't know. When he was younger and he got out of the military, he worked for, it wasn't Bushmaster at the time. It eventually got purchased and turned into the company Bushmaster Rifle. But he worked for a gentleman named Mac Wynn Jr., Mac Wynn Sr., I'm sorry. I spoke to Mac Wynn Jr. That was the CEO of the company. I know Richard was in arms sales, so I don't know. Was he still selling arms? He told his cousin that he was taking care of people that owed him money, that there were people that owed him money that needed to be taken care of. And that's what he was doing on the strip. So it's so crazy.
Well, it kind of ties back into the arms deal that he caught the other Green Berets in, right?
Yeah. It's very similar pattern there. Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you're still working on with him, or because the book is done and the documentary is done, it's all put to bed and you're willing to let sleeping dogs lie?
Every time I've tried to let it lie, somebody will contact me with some new crazy. There is a really angle that I'm thinking about. There was a guy who I don't want to name right now, a very famous politician that was in those meetings in that undercover operation, that his name has been protected all these years. And I know who it is. And I could approach that person, and I don't know. I've talked to other people about it. That might be something that could be the biggest rabbit hole. And I don't, at this point in time, I'm 52 years old. I just had my second back surgery, just got 2 epidurals yesterday. I'm all beat up. I need to just relax.
But there's part of you that's going to eventually want to get these questions answered, right? Like, I'm talking to you now and I can look at you and I can tell that this isn't finished for you. You might take a break, but I don't think
I think I'm taking a break, but yeah, you're right. All right. When is this story going to end? I don't know if it does. I don't know if the Richard Flaherty story really ever ends.
Yeah, man, I'm feeling like there's a second documentary coming. I'm not lying here. I think there's more that you're going to find out here that, and I'm morbidly curious at this point.
Obviously, the crazy thought of me following his footsteps to Iraq, because I know where he was in Iraq, and I know where he was in Venezuela, I know where he was in Cambodia, and I have hotel receipts, and I could follow his track, including flying up to North Dakota and some of the other strange places he went to. Yeah, that's come across my mind. But like I said, man, be careful what you look for, because, if you give a shit, if you don't, doing a documentary is such a big mountain to climb. I'm respectful of that mountain now. I was just too dumb when I started it to know not know how much hard work it would be. So I'm a little wiser now to know that maybe don't poke that bear.
If you weren't a cop, would accessing a lot of this information be more difficult? Were you able to get things just because you knew people who ran these systems and everything else?
Yeah, 100%. It would have been, yeah, it could have been done, but yeah, you would have needed a good investigation team. Like the team was me. It was just me. My dad would help me when he could. But there was, it was really greatly helped with, and the same thing is, I don't know if those military guys would have just talked to some reporter, and, a lot of the people that opened up to me, maybe they felt a little more comfortable that I was a cop, and, I tried to do the best I could, and my reasons were valid.
You got to go to Iraq, dude, to figure out what was going on. I'm
Only if you're going to watch my back, man. I need some protection.
Good. I'll go with you.
I need somebody watching my back. This old man can't do what he used to anymore.
It's crazy to think. And I guess the one thing that keeps going through my mind is, how does one person do all this and keep it quiet for so long? Like, we're at an age at this point where you leave a footprint everywhere you go, as you've just alluded to, digital and otherwise. How does somebody continue to do all this under relatively, conspicuous circumstances that nobody seems to know about for X, Y, and Z reasons? Like, there's just too many.
I got something for you. You're digging for something good.
No, I'm just saying.
So we had listen, we had a guy that the guy wouldn't talk to me, but my dad ended up having a good, just won the guy's trust over. And the guy gave us a deathbed confession of some of the stuff him and Flaherty. He was the guy who talked to us a lot about Africa and Rhodesia and some of the missions, and Richard doing undercover operations. So I have that recording, and someday I'm going to release it. There's some crazy stuff he talks about, stuff that I had to even pass on to other law enforcement people, because he's talking about open murders, not that he did, but that he had knowledge of. And I just need to make sure that these aren't open cases. So someday I'm going to release that audio of this guy that gives that confession, and it's pretty powerful. But the point I was going to make is, he would talk about how cautious Richard was 24/7 about covering his trail, covering his tracks. And I think Richard, his whole life, really covered his trail and his tracks. And he was certainly kept off the grid. And, nowadays, yeah, it'd be a little harder to stay off the grid. But, for as long as he could, I think he laid low.
Did he have a cell phone? I mean, is that how he contacted you?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, a homeless guy with a cell phone. He would recharge it at the supermarket. It was a little flip phone. But yeah.
It must have been a Nokia where you played Snake, that doesn't have everything that tracks everywhere you go all day long.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, in police work, we'd call them burner phones or throwdown phones. But that's one of the things I found in his storage locker, was he had about 4 other phones in packages on top of cryptic notes and, his passport, cryptic notes. He had language books in Arabic, and also everything from a spy movie Richard had in this one little box in his storage locker. So I don't know.
Oh, come on, man. This is just too creepy. This is weird. There's more.
There's a record. It's not in the document. There was a little recorder, one of those little those mini cassette player recorders I found. And I found.
And of course, you push play.
Of course, I pushed play. So I was it, man. I got it. Richard is going to confess to everything. He's going to tell me every mystery of life on this thing. So I start listening. For 45 minutes straight, I hear like what sounds like a leaf blower or some sort of mechanical thing just going. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I flip over the tape, leaf blower again, 45 minutes. Right at you can see the tape is about to run out. Right at the tape, Richard's voice comes on. And he finally, as soon as I get chills, because I know he's about to give me every answer. Because I found the tape at the end, the recorder, at the end of my investigation. It wasn't like at the beginning. So I was like, holy shit. If I would have found this recorder earlier, I would have known everything. He's about to confess. Here it is. What he was doing, who he was working for. And all he says is, almost at the end of the tape, I'm in the middle of watching an episode of Matlock. Time to stop recording. And it was the most bizarre, and that's so Richard Flaherty.
Wow. Did he ever speak to the VA? Or did he ever go to see the VA hospital or anything?
Yes, yeah, he went several times. Like I said, he thought he had
evaluations, or you weren't able to access that?
No, I would. I have his medical stuff, and that's when he was claiming he had PTSD and he wanted help. And there, like 5 or 10 pages handwritten in his notes talking about things that he saw. And he was talking about his injuries and his loss of hearing, and his hands weren't working well. That was one thing about Richard, is he would never shake hands, one, because his hands were so tiny. And also he said that, he had them broken in combat, his fingers broken, stuff like that. But when I asked him if we can do this project, and then he said, hey, if you start it, you finish it. That was the one and only time he ever shook my hand. And obviously I made sure I didn't squeeze his hand too hard, but that was the only time I shook his hand.
Wow. Any sense that he needed a mental diagnosis that he never got?
It came, if it did, it would have been too many years too late. He needed early intervention. When I started interviewing these guys, these other vets, they all had the same issues as Richard, but the guys who kept the train on the tracks, I'm it seemed like it was those three F's, family, faith, and friendship, that kept the train on the tracks when they were starting to go off the deep end. Because a lot of those guys would tell me, man, they just dreamed of just walking off into the woods and not having to deal with people anymore. But their families kept them, or their religious beliefs kept them, or their friends. For some reason, Richard didn't have those connections. There's some pretty sad things in his life. He had a fiance who was in a one-car accident. When Richard got back from the war, he was about to get married, and she got killed in a car accident. And then there was another woman that he's buried next to. The interesting thing about Richard Flaherty and his whole family of heroes, and everyone thinks that his only dream would probably want to be in Arlington's National Cemetery. Well, he knew he was qualified to be buried in Arlington years before he was killed, and he instead purchased a small cemetery plot in a kind of an anonymous cemetery in West Virginia, just to be next to the woman he loved. So, at the end, that was more important to him than any military burial, and that's where he is today.
You ever stop to think that maybe you were the family, friend, and faith that he needed in the latter part of his life?
That last week, the last week of his life, he was actually upbeat, except for that one weird thing where he accused me. He was very upbeat. So maybe he just found the guy to pass the story on to. I don't know what comfort I don't. Richard's a very difficult guy. I don't know what comfort our friendship had for him, but I hope it gave him some.
What did it give to you?
Amazing journey. Apparently my journey isn't over, but it's just been an incredible journey. Just learning about the world and learning about other people, and meeting so many great guys. The sad thing is, we've already lost so many guys that were in my documentary, some of the greatest, like, badass Vietnam vets, and they left maybe a year or two after the documentary went out, and it's been a little tough that way, but just that's life, man. You just live it, and the thing I said earlier about not talking too much about his death is just because life is so important. Life has to be cherished. Life has to be enjoyed. You have to laugh. Life has to be inspirational. Shit, there's enough darkness, and there's enough negativity, and there's enough terrible things in this world. Man, let's look at the incredible things Richard Flaherty accomplished, and what what he proved to the world, that nothing is impossible, except for, if you don't believe in it. And he believed in it, and he accomplished great things.
I don't want to say, does Richard's life, does the good outweigh the bad? Is there more good than questions in Richard's life?
I mean, there's a lifetime of service. There's a lifetime of service. I mean, you don't go off to war and not harm other people. So, but that's part of your job. So, depends on how much you appreciate a human being's service to his country, to his principles. So I think it's unless some crazy story comes out at the end of Richard killing people, that his life is almost all good.
Well, I think, despite my appetite and curiosity to know more, I on the surface, I think you said, you get the picture of an individual who clearly, as you coined earlier, an underdog in every situation in life, and someone who managed to rise up to challenges and overcome them. And from that standpoint, that's sort of the inspiration we always talk about here on the show. And I think that part is super important of it. But more than anything, you mentioned that life to service, and does it parallel for you as far as being a cop is concerned? In that sort of ideology of service, does that resonate with you?
I think it's important. I think it's important to serve. I think it's important to, look, as a soldier, there's things in the world that people don't want to know about. It's easier to go to sleep at night not knowing what evil is really out there, and seeing real evil, and dealing with life in tough situations. But you're not living in the real world. I mean, I think at least me and you know what the real world is, and maybe we have a greater appreciation of life because of it, as opposed to, people who live in their own little bubble. And I'm not insulting them. Your bubble is your bubble. We all live in our bubble in our own sense, but, we have just a better vision of what the world is, what life and death is. Maybe we're wiser for it.
What are you most proud of between the documentary and the book? Is it just that you're able to finish it, or, I mean, is there anything else in particular that stands out when you talk about the project in and of itself?
So it has nothing to do. I mean, those things matter to me, but my God, when I get somebody, write a review or send me a personal email or send me a message on Facebook or something, that his story had deep meaning for them, that thank you for telling his story. Thank you for not allowing it to. I mean, that to me makes me feel really, really good. It makes all the hard work 1,000 times worth it. It's incredibly rewarding when you go out without intention of even knowing if you're going to complete it or be successful or whatever the case is. But you set your mind to a task, and the fruits of that labor, when you don't put some idea in your head that this is going to be something great and people are going to love it. I don't know, like when that documentary first went out, I was sitting in the back of a movie theater. I remember at a film festival or something. I had no idea if people were going to like it, hate it, think it's garbage. I had no idea. There's no real way to tell until you do it. So to me, that so many people now find inspiration from his story is probably the greatest gift.
Well, on that note, David, again, it's been incredible talking to you, man. I want to know more. You've whet my appetite for this. Again, the book and the documentary, A Giant Killer, about the life of Richard J Flaherty, Green Beret, and shortest person ever served in the military. So make sure you guys check it out. But where else is there any ways we want to send them to get the documentary or the book or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, we can just keep it simple. And I know not everyone's the biggest fan, but Amazon will have everything for them. They'll have the documentary. It'll be free on Prime. You'll have a choice of the paperback audiobook or the Kindle. And I got real lucky. I got a guy just through a friend of a friend that read the audiobook, and people said, "Oh, why didn't you do it?" And I was like, I'm not good at that. And I certainly couldn't have done it as well as this guy did. So he really made it. I feel like the audiobook's really interesting. I'm interested by it, and I know the story pretty decently. You can catch the documentary on Google Play or YouTube. I think it's free on a thing called Tubi, Tubi. If you don't mind TV commercials, they'll show it to you for free. The documentary that when I released it in 2018, and then when I redid it, I renamed it The Giant Killer Finding Flaherty. So if you want to look for the documentary, just try to add the Finding Flaherty. If not, you Google search them. Thank God you'll see pictures of Richard and all over the internet now. And it wasn't me, somebody made a Wikipedia page for him. So I'm glad they did that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know who, but I guess you can just do it.
Well, yeah, anybody can get on Wikipedia. Still waiting for my page. I don't know if it's ever coming.
It's coming, man, brother. You're kicking ass on these interviews, man. That was a good interview. I'm really, you sat back, you picked your shots, and you asked me questions no one's ever asked me. You made me really stop, and I'm like, oh man, this guy would have been a great detective.
Yeah, well, it's not my first rodeo at this interview thing, so I appreciate that, David. But seriously, in all seriousness, thank you for your time, and certainly appreciate the story. I'm so excited. And I hope our audience really, dives into A Giant Killer as well. And so we certainly appreciate you joining us. Best of luck going forward. I am still waiting for the second one to come out. I'd like to hold you to that at some point in time, because I know there's more to this. I know there's more to this. When you get
as long as you're coming with me to Iraq, I'm in.
Listen, we'll call the State Department. I'm sure they got our reservation.
You know what? That was the guys. I'm not joking. That was the guys. I couldn't remember. Like, my brain is in a fog. It was the State Department. I kept saying Homeland Security. No. It was it was the State Department that Richard claimed was following around the most. That just popped that into my mind.
They're not busy at all these days. Trust me. They've got a lot of time on their hands. So,
yeah.
David Yuzuk, thank you so much for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you so much for having me on.
That'll do it for this week's episode. We certainly appreciate you guys joining us again. If you're watching on the Hazard Ground YouTube channel, we appreciate you subscribing. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so. Also on killcliff.com and the Killcliff app. We appreciate you guys being part of the Hazard Ground community, and we'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Killcliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.